Hey, Simon here, and today we talk about Alpha 1 materials. And as you might know, Alpha 1 materials or shaders only support a color depth of 1 bit for the transparency information, which means you can either see a pixel or you cannot. You cannot have half transparent pixels like materials or shaders supporting 8-bit color depth. So does this mean that you can only do boring stuff with Alpha 1? Not at all. Okay, most of the time you will see it used for common stuff like this fence, where a tileable Alpha 1 texture of netting wire is mapped on some polygons, which looks really good until you see it from narrow angles, where you can notice that it's actually a flat plane or flat polygon. By the way, in Germany there was a really famous pop song about such a netting wire fence. In German we call it Maschendrahtzaun. And it sold, according to Wikipedia, 800,000 CDs. I have no idea why, that's really crazy, but I thought that might be a funny information. But back to the topic. For today I collected 5 creative use cases for Alpha 1. And if you don't think that they are cool or you know even more awesome stuff, let me know and then I can add it as an update. Let's start with number 5. Which is pretty simple. With a second layer on your shader or model, you can add crisp detail, like here for example on a Mirelurk of Fallout 4. Or of course you can add detail to the edges of such stones, which I wrote in my first article about the stones and the edges of the stones in Fallout 3. And here is a nice example of a layer on top of the geometry, which creates some extra motion. By the way, I don't know exactly how it's done, but at least it looks a bit Alpha 1-ish to me. So from what I saw, they use one texture for both the base geometry and the moving layer on top. And this layer might be extra geometry or it might be mixed in only one shader, I don't know. But really interesting, the alpha channel of that texture gets thresholded. We will talk more about this in a minute. And this thresholded alpha channel defines which parts of the texture are visible regarding to the moving layer. So I did a small test, for example, with a modified alpha channel, and this is the result. You can clearly see that only a small portion of my smooth alpha channel blobs are actually used. And zooming in further, you can see the hard edges of the thresholded blobs, which is the reason why I think about Alpha 1 in that example, even if I don't know how exactly it's done. And as a small conclusion, here you can see the layers blended on top of each other. And now let's get to number 4. We have to deal with some basic trade-offs when it comes to game art. We can just model every detail, which costs a lot of polygons, but of course it looks great from any angle. We can save some polygons to save some performance, but of course it might make our stuff look a bit more angled. Or we can use alpha planes, which add great amount of detail until you look from the wrong angle and see, for example, that it looks really flat. But by combining standard geometry with alpha planes, it's possible to hide some problems. Maybe not the best example, but I really like the broken planks on these houses because they add a great amount of detail. Unfortunately, you can see the trick pretty clear by looking at the planks from above. But still, it's really interesting that they just stack planes over each other and don't have any problems with set fighting. My guess would be that they have some priorities assigned to the different materials so that the renderer knows what comes first even when the planes are really near to each other. But let's get to an example which I like even more. Do we see what's going on here? They use alpha planes to make the holes look really round. But in addition, they add some low poly geometry to give the object some thickness. And yes, of course, you can see the low poly edges on the backside of the model, but still it creates a really good impression to me and I really liked this trick when I saw it first. Number 3, the alpha barrel. It's a bit similar to what I just talked about, but still I find it really interesting. In most games, barrels aren't perfectly round to save some polygons. This holds true for Fallout 4. By looking at the barrel, we see some angles on the barrel, but what's that? Look at the front. The front of the barrel looks really round. And they do that by hiding the angularity of the low poly cylinder with a plane where a really round alpha 1 shape is mapped to. This might not be breathtaking, but at least for me, it was the first time I saw something like that. And also interesting, they don't cap the ends of the cylinder like you would usually expect. Again, they use a alpha 1 plane with a round shape on it, and that's the end of the cylinder. To be honest, I don't know if this is the perfect solution. I don't know if this creates much overdraw. Maybe the engine is better capable of handling alpha geometries than others. I don't know, but at least I think it's a really interesting approach, which you might not see in every other game. And now let's get to number 2, moving alpha or alpha thresholding. Some time ago I thought if we can only show or don't show a pixel in an alpha 1 shader, then there shouldn't be any need for gray values, right? But that's not true, and there are 2 reasons for it. First, let's look at 2 alpha channels, one with anti-aliasing and one without. And if you map these guys to planes and look at them from distance, they look really similar. But at a closer look, you will see some great differences in the quality. And the reason for this is the filtering on the graphic card. Both textures get upscaled when you see them big on your screen, and as you see, even the texture without any gray values now has some, but looks a bit more clunky. And now, with the help of a threshold, is defined which of these gray values are completely white and which are completely black. And as you see, the texture, which already had gray values in it, is better smoothed during the filter process, and the final results just looks rounder. At least when you use a threshold value below 1. If you use 1, the result looks really similar in both cases. And that's why gray values can help even if the texture is only used for alpha 1, which supports only black and white. And the second reason is even more interesting, because you can use the threshold for creating great effects if you have gray values in your alpha channel. For example, in Firewatch, they use the threshold to make trees in the distance have less details. And if you are interested in that topic, I strongly recommend to watch the whole talk. It's really interesting. And here's another stunning example which I really like. This is my texture you just saw earlier, and here you can see what happens when I manually change the threshold value. And here you see a particle system doing exactly that, but of course with a different texture. It spawns in particle, and over its lifetime, the threshold is increased. Isn't that amazing? I really like it. And below, you can see an example where I don't know it for sure, they used similar stuff for the slime and the blood. And now let's get to number 1, which is my favorite, but it's not number 1 because of spectacular effects. Yeah, it's the other way around. It's very subtle, but I waited a long time to see a solution to this problem, and I thought about it several times in the past, but didn't came up with a solution. And I expected it coming from new technology like tessellation or parallax occlusion mapping or something like that, but it's the other way around. If you have a delicate structure like this, you can't avoid that it looks flat if you look at it from a narrow angle. And if you would like do the fallout trick with adding some geometry to give it some thickness, you would have to spend a lot of polygons to model out all this great detail. But when I played Batman Arkham City, I noticed that these guys don't look flat. As you see here, there's some depth. And I was wondering, is this a crazy shader or something very complex? And I looked into it and saw it's very simple. It's just 2 planes with a small offset, and the perspective does the rest for you. I think it's like with many of these tricks. If you know them, they don't seem very spectacular anymore. But personally, I never thought about such a simple solution. And of course, yes, it has some problems when you look at from really narrow angles or if the planes have too much space in between them. But when you play the game just as you should and don't look too close, it looks really well and adds a really nice subtle thickness to these guys, and I really like it. Well done, Batman artists. That's it. That's my personally Alpha 1 use case favorites. And thanks for watching this video. if you want to tell me your favorites or have other cool observations, or you don't like it at all, or whatever feedback you have, just drop it into the comments or write me a mail or Twitter or whatever. Thanks for watching and have a nice day.